Let me start by asking you, Sanjiv, and while I was addressing this audience, I was talking about the idea of many Indias and how that reconciles with the idea of this new India. And I know that this is a subject that you're passionate about because you firmly believe that there is no one India in that sense, and that's the approach that you take both as far as your innovation is concerned on the product side as well as your marketing. So give me some sense of how you reconcile this idea of many Indias with the new India going forward.
Yeah. India is not a homogeneous country. And I firmly believe, before this assignment, I used to run Unilever's business in North Africa, Middle East. And I firmly believe that the 20 countries of North Africa and Middle East were more homogeneous than the 29 states of India. Yeah, there it is, one predominant language, one predominant culture, one predominant religion. In India, the tastes are different, the dresses are different, the food palettes are different, the cultures are different. So if you're a big company, a national company, you cannot be looking at India with one lens. And that is the reason, Shereen, we had the Winning in Many India strategy, where we have broken up India into 14 consumer clusters, where the strategies for each cluster are distinctive, different from each other, because the competitors are different, the penetration levels are different, the wealth of the citizens are different, and the living standard measures, the way we measure the socio-economic of our consumers is very different. And that is the reason we have done it. It's added complexity, but it's like a good cholesterol, right for the business.
It's like good cholesterol. But Satish, I want to talk to you about this aspiration that we've had for so many years of drug discovery in India. Yes, it's capital intensive. Yes, it's long gestation. But you just gave us the China example of how they may in fact break through. What is holding us back? What is the single biggest problem?
So, like I alluded to it, it's mainly the policy intervention, right? So if you see the Chinese government, if you just look at 2-3 things they did, the most important thing being the government funded almost about $3 billion for innovation, right? Way back in 2007 sometime. So it provided the capital to start with. So that might be difficult for India to do to a certain extent. But they could start small, right? So that's one thing India can do in terms of at least having a grant, which would help do that. Because not that there's no such grant system, there is BIRAC, all kinds of things. But if you see the conditions attached to it and the quantum, right? So for each project, it's like a 50 lakhs, 1 crore. I mean, it's not going to get you anything, right? So that's one part of it. But the bigger thing, if you ask me, is this whole thing about talent, right? So you also need to, when you need to create that ecosystem, you also need to get the requisite talent for that. They launched something called the 1,000 Talents Program.
Okay.
Right, so which was basically to attract people.
Can industry not take the lead in that? I mean, I understand the capital constraints, and we're seeing that play out across various segments, whether it's startups or you're talking about drug discovery. But can the talent issue not be addressed by industry? Can you not take the lead to build the bridge with academia? We do, in the sense that the companies also collaborate with academia to do this. For example, there's a Dr. Reddy's Institute of Life Sciences, which we have floated. It was supposed to be from the government again, but obviously they didn't fund it enough, so we ended up funding it. But then if you see the other institutions, the nature of the research that takes place and what the industry wants, right? So there's a deep level of, there's partly mistrust. There is also not that level of engagement that is required. So it's always the question of, you're saying industry should take the lead. We always keep saying the institutions also should come forward with something more tangible. Okay, so we need to get over that trust deficit as well. Question that's come in, and I'll put that to you, Sanjiv, because I think it's more relevant to you. Has the Indian government been partisan towards a few companies like Patanjali? and no politically correct answers.
Okay. Let me look at it from our lens. First is, India is not a zero-sum game. It's not that if someone wins, we will lose. The second important bit is that I think competitors, if it is on a level playing field, are good for the consumers.
So is there a level playing field or not?
I'll leave it for you and the audience to decipher. But let me give you a perspective. I think a good competitor brings out the best in Hindustan Unilever. Yeah.
So what is Patanjali brought out in Hindustan Unilever?
Well, okay. I think a good question. And, to an MIT audience, let me give some facts. Last year, while we are, I think, 4 times bigger than them, grew by 14%, they had a negative growth of 10%. So that's what it did to us.
Aha. Okay, Satish, a question to you. Perhaps the biggest disruption that the generic business, not just in India, but world over, is faced with is President Trump. We just heard what he had to say in the State of the Union address on dealing with generics and pricing. How are you dealing with that? I mean, do you follow him on Twitter every day to see what he's tweeting about? How's that impacting your business decisions?
I do follow you on Twitter just for entertainment, right? So I sure. So no, on the drug pricing part of it, right? So obviously it's going to affect the what do you call the multinationals or the big pharma companies in a much bigger way than what it might do to generic companies. But what's going to happen is disruption for sure, right? So which will also affect the generics pricing. But I think at the end of the day, frankly, we see it as an opportunity because who can compete in that kind of a space, right? So if you see the volumes, if you see the portfolio of products, if you see, the cost leadership, I think Indian companies are very well poised to take on the challenge. Of course, the margins will be, temporarily take a beating at that point of time, but I think we're quite prepared for it. So if it happens, it happens, I mean.
Okay, if it happens, it happens. Another question that's come in for you, so I'll put that question to you. Satish, what are your thoughts on medical marijuana, and does India have a future in it?
Absolutely. Frankly, on a serious note, it does have a certain role in it because I've also been following it quite closely in terms of the developments in other countries. So if you see anecdotally, right, so I've seen a friend of mine whose father was suffering from cancer, for example. And then when you see the palliative care, right, so he was pleading with me to say, it's like, can you, using your own sources, get this medical marijuana because that's the only thing being prescribed in this country. But then again, if you see what happens in India, even something like a morphine, which is required for patients with excruciating pain, especially in cancer care, it's not available freely because it comes under the Narcotics Act, which again, because in this whole spirit of finance ministry bashing, it comes under Ministry of Finance, by the way. Don't ask me why, but that's where it is.
That's odd, yeah.
Now, any small
petition
violation...
Mr. Swamy, he'll take it up with the finance ministry.
That's why I was hoping he'll hear that. So if you see the whole criminality attached to any deviation from that, because there was a point of time we seriously, Dr. Reddy's, did consider getting into opioid derivatives at one point of time. But we gave it up because looking at the whole regulations, I mean, no Indian company would take it up, right? So it's that bad. So one is reform of those laws, right? Take it away from the finance ministry to begin with, and to do a whole host of things, and also change the laws around it. That's one part of it. Other thing is also to create this kind of an awareness, because whereas most countries are actively encouraging it, of course they're also encouraging it for other reasons, but if you see from the medical marijuana point of view, I think the need is especially very crucial in India. It needs to be done.
Okay. We've spoken a lot about innovation, and I want to pick up that issue with you, Sanjiv, because at Hindustan Unilever, you are not just innovating for India, but you're also innovating for the world. Now, what is it going to take for us to be able to ensure that we build on the momentum of creating this culture of innovation? Sure. We talked about patents and how that's working for the Indian pharmaceutical industry. We've got a new patent regime in place. There's a lot of effort being put into setting up new patent offices to make the process faster and smoother. What are you specifically seeing on the innovation front? What have been the successes and the misses, and what needs to be done to take that forward?
Yeah, I'll just pick up two big issues. First is the ecosystem. Why Boston is what it is, or the Valley is what it is, is because of collaboration between the academia, between the R&D institutions of corporations and the government. This is something which we lack as an ecosystem. We are developing it with, say, our R&D center in Bangalore, which is a global R&D center, with Institute of Science, with IITs, and with many startups. But this is something which needs to be done on a much bigger scale. The second is the mindset. This whole mindset of jugaad, I hate it.
I have to agree with you.
Because jugaad means less for less. Jugaad is very different from frugal innovation, which is more for less. I think as Indians, we have to move away from these quick fixes and move to where we can look at in a holistic manner. A good innovation works when you are solving a consumer problem, when there is technology which is distinctive, and where you are able to appropriate a large part of the value chain. If you focus on that, then you will build really world-class innovations rather than doing quick fixes.
No, I completely agree with you. I think this idea of jugaad has been romanticized as sort of the way forward for Indian innovation.
It's a disaster.
But I have to agree. I'm on your side. But Satish Reddy, just to take that point forward, frugal innovation, low-cost innovation, especially in the context of healthcare to make it more accessible and more affordable. What's the future and what's the way forward?
I think India has a great chance, right? So especially because if you see the dysfunctionality or the high cost that you see in mostly developed countries on the healthcare systems, India has a chance, which was coined at Davos, to leapfrog all that.
Yeah.
Right? So using disruptions in technology, telemedicine, for example, or even in terms of distribution, e-pharmacies are now going to be a reality in India, hopefully once the regulation gets cleared. So these kind of disruptions, I think in terms of accessibility, in terms of delivery of healthcare, of course it needs a few other policy fixes which still need to be done. I think it can completely transform healthcare in India. I'm quite sure of that.
Okay, let's hope that...
Can I just add one more thing, very important bit, where India could leverage is now as you get into this whole space of big data analytics and AI, I think India could play to its serious advantage, provided we can harness or leverage on the India stack, the Aadhaar, and we have laws which will prevent the kind of walled gardens you have in the West, but use data for public good, and we could leapfrog the state in which the economy is to the frontier economy as we pursue our $10 trillion goal.
We were looking at a lot of the ads that you've put out where you try and communicate the purpose of your brands to the consumer. And I think a lot of people will be interested to know what is the kind of ROI that you have seen? Because at the end of the day, as you pointed out, this is not CSR. This is not an altruistic exercise. It's enlightened self-interest.
Yeah. The best way would be looking at our growth and our market cap. We would perhaps be one of the only subsidiaries of a parent of any industry anywhere in the world which has a market cap exceeding $50 billion. Yeah? And let me give you the value of trust in a simplistic way. As an accountant, I can always say that the market value is the present value of future earnings. But remove that, look at the market cap, remove your total assets today, which is $2.5 billion. $55 billion, $2.5 billion. The balance is the value of trust. That's what the consumers give to you if you are able to occupy the emotional space, meet the needs of functionality, and very importantly, be a purpose-driven company and a values-led business.
On the issue of trust, and this is something that you alluded to in your talk as well, Satish, and for those of us who track the pharmaceutical sector, every day you're seeing US FDA regulatory action, whether it's issuing a Form 483 and for those of you who don't know, this is one of the most dreaded things when an Indian company is served with a Form 483 and how many observations there are and what kind of observations there are. But, what is the quality challenge that you face today? And there has been a perception in India of perhaps a regulatory bias as well. Is that just our sort of way of consoling ourselves, or is there legitimate reason to believe that there is something like that?
Not really. I mean, this is what people keep saying. There probably is quite a bit of bias, but I don't completely agree with that. Right. So that's to begin with. And just on that note, since now it's public, our FTO 7 unit, which you must be familiar with, has been cleared of the warning letter that happened last night.
That is good news. Yes.
Right, so now, but again, just looking at the whole thing, it's also this thing about the mindset of people, because you use jugaad in a different term. Right. So if you see the practices of something that we also find once in a while on some of the people, it's the mindset again. They just want to look at a quick fix, just so that it's like before the auditor comes that everything is all done. So this kind of a mindset itself, and also if you look at it even one step before that, let's face it. This is not to criticize anything, but it's like we live in a lot of chaos, right? So you step out of the house. You come across a lot of dirt, you come across a lot of traffic, a lot of noise and things like that. And then you're expected to follow strict rules according to procedures, according to the documents when you're at the shop floor, right? To get people to have that mindset, that all this is important for a certain reason, it takes a lot of culture change. That's one of the core things that we always struggle with. It's also, I think, this whole explosive growth that the generic industry has faced. That's why I talked about that quality manpower. right? So in terms of what the education system churns out, I mean, it's like we spend a lot of time getting them to unlearn what they've learned.
Yeah.
It's not in tune with the times. There is no learning on regulatory affairs, for example, in terms of what's being done. So we have to go through that whole process again. So you always are short of manpower. It's almost like musical chairs from somebody from our company goes to another company. So if it's good people going, so it's good because they spread good practices. But if it's bad people who have done a mistake, who've been fired, I mean, that's exactly what they're spreading to other industries. Right? So I think that this whole human element, I think, is a key thing in terms of, what we are facing with. But by and large, if you ask me, most of the things have pretty much been addressed at this point of time.
It's not exactly the question that's come in, but let me try and tweak it and put it to the two of you. Through the course of this morning and forums like this, where you talk about India's competitive advantage or what needs to be done for India to improve and enhance its competitive advantage, the bulk of the attention and the emphasis is on what the government can do. Can the government bring down interest rates? Can the government provide, access to easier loans and so on and so forth? Can the government facilitate a much more nurturing environment? Is industry sort of not really stepping up to its task of being much more competitive, of creating globally competitive, relevant Indian brands? Sanjiv?
I think the onus is also on media, Shereen.
When all else fails.
It is very important for you not to focus just on what the government is doing, but what the private sector is doing and making a difference to the country.
Yeah.
I'll just give you an example. Last December, we had the Global Investors Conference in India, and we brought in investors from all over the world to India to tell them the India story through the lens of HUL. And they were fascinated.
Yeah.
So it's not that it is not being done. I think it's also very important that we do it in a much bigger fashion, because India is on a cusp of greatness, and government alone can't do it. Let's accept it.
Yeah.
It has to be the government, it has to be the private sector, it has to be the civil society working in tandem and helping India reach its potential. I'm an optimist and I'm very bullish. I think India is set for greatness in this century.
No, absolutely. I think there is no doubt in anyone's mind about the fact that we will build on the momentum that we're currently on. But Satish, my question though is that why is it that with the exception of few Indian companies and few Indian brands, we haven't been able to create globally competitive brands in India?
No, in the sense, so again, from the policy framework, the way we see it is, so if there is certainty in policy, then the companies can invest money behind it, right? So if you see something like price control, which you're very familiar with in India at this point of time, there's a lot we would like to do with our branded products, the branded generics in India. But then, if there is an axe from the price control which comes in from the government all of a sudden, which has happened in a few instances, right? So you don't want to take that decision yet. Right, so we find that kind of a competitive when it comes to the products, for example. But then if you see the other parts of it, I think we have already proven ourselves, right? So on APS, we have proven ourselves, and then we did what we could, and then things changed. And you're familiar with what happened with China on the API front. Yeah. And then at this point of time, generics, if you see, for example, we are way ahead of China. I don't think China will be anywhere close to us when it comes to competing on the generics front. So I think we have already proved ourselves in terms of what we created. That the biggest thing will be on innovation. Right, because that, again, I'm saying, is the holy grail, which if we don't do anything at this point of time, we will completely miss the bus. And that's where really we'll lose out on.
But the question is, are you going to wait for the government or are you going to move forward?
So we did, right? That's the example I gave.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what are we talking about? So in 1992, without any support from the government, I mean, everything else, but especially on funds, because it's a risky game. Yeah. Right? So as long as we were able to discover molecules, license it to multinationals, the stock price went up, everything was fine. Right? But the risk of failure is pretty high in this game. 1 in 10,000 makes it to the market on any product that enters a clinical trial. And that's what happened to us. Right? So if you see, in terms of R&D expense, it was one of the highest, but you can't sustain it. That's why our stock was punished at that point of time. We had to go through a different model, but we're still at it. Right? So that's why I kept using the example of China to say it needs more. There is this industry academic collaboration that's required. A lot of talent to be attracted back to India, venture capital funding. To create that whole system, I think is a big intervention that's required.
Are we likely to see more consolidation in the Indian FMCG space? Are you going to continue to play Consolidator as you have been? And what is it that you would be looking to at this point in time from an M&A perspective?
From our lens, M&A is not for the sake of M&A or to give a boost to the CEO's ego. I think it more comes in from a strategic lens. If we have a portfolio gap, and if you can fill in with the right kind of acquisition at the right price. In the last couple of years, we have done 3 deals. We had Indulekha, which is amazing. Then we did Aditya Milk, and now the last one was GSK Consumer Health, which is a big acquisition in India, the biggest in the FMCG space ever. But again, this is, we wanted to strengthen our foods and refreshment portfolio. Here we have got a market leader, and in a country where the penetration level of HFD is just less than about 25%, and in a country where 9 out of 10 kids do not get the right micronutrients, or 4 out of 10 kids suffer from malnutrition. So this was the space to enter into. And that's the reason we got in, and we were lucky to acquire this fabulous business.
So appetite for more?
Again, if you look across India, there aren't many targets of this scale, size, and value which we could pursue. There would always be bolt-on acquisitions, which we will always be looking at.
Satish, the question to you is the opposite, because I was asking Sanjiv whether he's going to be playing Consolidator and looking at more M&A. And the question that I know that you've been asked for years and years and years is, look what happened to Ranbaxy, there was Daiichi, and then there was Sun Pharma. Look what happened to the Piramal's, sold out as well. Will Dr. Reddy sell out to a global pharma company?
No, not at all, because if you see the game that's going to happen I think the M&A will continue, by the way. What you will see on the other hand is Indian companies acquiring overseas assets. That will actually start again, right? So you've seen what happened with, say, large company like Sandoz selling off the generic assets, and that was a big deal which Aurobindo went after. Perrigo is also doing that. So you'll see a lot of the deals on that front on one hand. You will also see deals in India, right? Like you've seen Torrent buying Unichem and Elder before that. Because there's plenty of scope for consolidation there. So I think you'll see those kind of deals than the kind of deals that you saw in the past. Indian companies selling off.
Are you actively looking at both inbound or outbound consolidation?
We will always be looking outbound, right? Because clearly I'm saying that's the trend that you will see, because companies from India are growing from strength to strength, and especially this opportunity for generics has opened up. Right, because the top 3, which we never thought will happen, but you saw Mylan, Teva, and even Sandoz. Sandoz is already out of the game. That they're talking about divesting assets there, right? So, I mean, who are the people who are going to play in that game? It's going to be large Indian companies, of course.
So let me ask the two of you. I mean, if you look at your CEO deck or your crystal ball or whatever it is that you look at over the next 5 years, and the Indian story has been one of consumption. And largely the growth has been driven by consumption. Sanjiv, what is the outlook for the next 5 years, especially from consumption perspective as well as for the FMCG sector?
If you look at India's GDP, 60% is consumption. And then you look at it from a growth perspective, I think 6-7% growth for India is par for the course. What we have to ask a question is, especially with the new government which will come in the next couple of months, can they bend the growth curve and take us to the 8 to 10% growth on a sustainable basis? I think that's what we seek. As a consumer goods company, for us, what is more important is inclusive growth. We need more money in the hands of more consumers. That's when it makes a difference. And I hope we should be able to do that.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us.